Welcome to our fall webinar. I'm Dr. Caitlin Youngquist, founder of DirtWorks Wyoming, and tonight we're going to talk about things that you can do to help take care of your soil in the fall to set yourself up for growing more food in the summer during our short growing season in Wyoming. We have challenging soils, but there's a lot that we can do during the fall to set ourselves up for success. Thank you. So a reminder about our soil system. It relies heavily on air, water, and food, and sunlight is our energy source. So these are all components we'll talk about a little bit tonight. And as a reminder, these are all things as a farmer or as a gardener that we manage. So does the plant have the energy it needs? Air in the soil as well. Air is actually a big component of the soil system. Water and food. And another thing that is important to remember that we'll talk about as well is the soil cover. So keeping our soil covered and protected is an important piece of this equation as well. So fall is the time to think about decomposition. We often think about building our soil in the spring, but fall is actually the time to invest in our soil. So the microbes eat the organic materials, things that we often think of as waste materials, and they help release the plant nutrients and then create complex organic molecules that can help stimulate plant growth. So two things are going on. They're releasing nutrients and they're producing compounds that stimulate plant growth. And that's why we really want to feed these microbes that are decomposing organic matter in the soil. And the process of decomposition requires food, air, water, and time. And especially in our very arid, dry climate here in the Mountain West in Wyoming, and where it gets very cold in the winter and very dry, water and time become very important factors. So a few things to think about as you're starting to clean up your garden. I don't know where some of you are coming from, but here in the Worland area, we haven't quite had our first frost yet, at least right in town. But it did finally cool off a little bit, and we're starting to think about pulling things out of the garden and winding down for the fall. So the thing I'd like to remind you of is don't clean up too much, right? And that dead plants help feed the soil. So leave our roots in the ground, remove diseased plants if you have those, and leave a lot of your dead plants on the surface of the soil or leaving roots in the ground. That will help continue to feed the soil microbes. This is a picture I just took yesterday as I was cleaning out some raised beds. This is a root mass. And if you think about, that's from one of the plants I just pulled out. And so if you think about it, that's a lot of potential soil organic matter that can be left in the soil if you just cut it off at the surface of the soil. So leaving those root balls in the soil can really help. And that all breaks down and decomposes, and it leaves channels in the soil for air and water to move, right? And it's a source of nutrients as it decomposes. So think about that as you're cleaning up your garden, leaving some of these in the soil. These are corn stalks, the same example here, just cutting them off at the surface and leaving them to decompose in the soil. They can be dug up again in the spring potentially, or tilled in if you do use a rototiller in your garden, or you can just plant between them and let them continue to decompose over time. So fall is also the time to add soil amendments to your garden, and those are so carbon-based soil amendments are manure, compost, wool, things like kelp or crab, bone and feather meals, and then biochar. These are all carbon-based soil amendments. And then we have some mineral-based soil amendments that can also be added in the fall, something like rock phosphate or green sand. Green sand is a source of potassium, lime or gypsum. These are all things that can be added in the fall to, again, give the microbes time to break these down and to let the soil system kind of stabilize and feed. Don't put it to bed with an empty stomach. That's another way to think about for the soil. So again, feeding in the fall with your carbon-based soil amendments or your mineral-based soil amendments. This is a little bit of a quick science lesson here on soil carbon that I think is interesting to look at really quickly. So we have at the very top, look at under plant residues, we have structural carbon. That's your things, think about a corn stalk or some wood or something very, very high in carbon, very woody material. Corn stalk or a sunflower stalk is a good example of this. And then we have our metabolic carbon, something that's relatively higher in nitrogen. Think about that of the weeds that you pull out of the ground, maybe alfalfa, some cover crops, leaves, those greener plants. Those are your metabolic carbon, right? And so they're going to decompose at different rates. So cover crops or the weeds or any of all the things you're pulling out of your garden right now, a lot of that is going to go into what we call our structural or our metabolic carbon that is going to decompose and feed the soil, right? And then as those microbes break it down, they are aerobes like we are. They're breathing carbon dioxide or breathing oxygen and respiring carbon dioxide. So as they break it down, it becomes more and more stable over time, right? Over hundreds of years. And then we have our active pool of soil organic matter. We feed the active pool with things like manure, wool, crab and kelp and bone meal and feather meal and those other kinds of organic amendments. That's how we feed our active soil carbon. That turns over in every year or two. That's generally about 20% of our soil organic matter. And it's where the microbes and the plants get most of their food, most of their nutrients, and their carbon, where the microbes get most of their carbon as an energy source. And it can change very, very quickly, and it has somewhat of an impact on soil structure, but it's a major food source for soil microbes and a carbon source also for soil microbes. Then we get into our at the very bottom, you'll see the passive soil organic matter. That turns over in hundreds or thousands of years. Very, very, very stable, very slow to change. We can add stable carbon with things like humates or biochar or compost. And it's most of our soil carbon, our soil organic matter goes into that pool, maybe 60 to 90% of what's in our soil. It's very slow to change, but that's where we get those big benefits of healthy soil of like our water holding capacity, our nutrient holding capacity. That's measured by our cation exchange capacity. So the ability of our soil to hold nutrients is in that passive soil organic matter pool. And our ability of the soil to hold water and that structure and what makes our soil just high functioning. There's not a lot of food left at that point, not a lot of food left in that, or not a lot of energy, carbon left in that organic matter, and it's very resistant to loss. So ideally, over time, we're getting more, it's like, think about like a savings account. You're just getting more and more carbon tucked away into that passive organic matter over time, right? And we can speed that process up by adding things like compost or biochar, and also just letting the microbes over time convert all of the other organic materials into more and more stable forms. Our slow pool has kind of the benefits of both, and it can move back and forth. So there's some decomposition still happens, but it's much more slower than our active pool or our plant residues. So the carbon and the soil organic matter goes into these different pools, and we can look at that and think, well, if I add compost, it supports all these different soil functions. It provides both the food, the energy source, and some of these soil quality characteristics. If I add some of this stable carbon, it really helps improve the soil function. If I add things like cover crops, make sure to use the weeds or the garden cleanup and incorporate that back into the soil. That feeds the microbes at the top of the system. So just think about we're feeding the soil in different ways as this carbon moves through the system. Another way to look at this too, if we look at this triangle here on the left, compost provides, again, your humus, your lignin, your polyphenols, some of these really larger, complex, stable compounds that support the soil, whereas our other more easily digestible materials like your cover crops or your manures, or something like wool or feather meal provides those other nutrients, other carbon sources. So a reminder here as we go into fall, thinking about feeding our soil with a lot of carbon and a lot of food. So carbon is the energy source and minerals are the nutrient source. Nature takes time, and decomposition is most effective with adequate water and air. And like I reminded you, this is a very cold, dry climate. So adding a lot of water in the fall is really important. And throughout the winter on your landscape as you are able, water your trees, your perennial landscaping, your garden, even though there's nothing growing in your garden over the winter, keeping that soil moist will help in the long term. Organic amendments really help support soil function and they feed those soil microbes. So adding something with a carbon base is going to help long term. Time is another thing that's important to think about if you're using fresh manure. So maybe you have access to somebody with some cows or sheep or horses and you have some access to some fresh manure or just manure that's been piled up behind some pens. Fall is the best time to add that because it reduces the risk of any contaminants that might be in that manure, and any potential food safety concerns. So you're going to put that fresh manure on in the fall, and then by the time it's time to plant your garden in the spring, you won't have any risk of food safety or contamination of the food you're growing, and you also have time for that soil, those microbes to break down that soil and reduce any risk also of burning or manure that's too hot for the plants. And then mineral amendments require some level of chemistry and biology to again make them more available to the plants. And so those should be added in the fall. What should not be added in the fall is any of your synthetic fertilizers. So if you're using a Miracle-Gro type product or a lawn or just a general garden landscape lawn fertilizer that's a synthetic base, that is not an organic base or carbon based, that should be added in the spring because there's potential for some of that to be lost over the winter. So that should be added in the spring. But any carbon-based or amendments or any mineral amendments like I said, lime or sulfate or green sand or anything like that can be added in the fall. Another important thing is to keep the soil very well covered. So things like hay and straw, wood chips, wool, cardboard, leaves, grass clippings, these are all great materials to cover your soil with in the fall. Hay, if you can get your hands on some old alfalfa hay, especially something that maybe people aren't able to feed or it's been rained on or it's been moldy, that's a great soil amendment. It has much more nutrients than straw, for example, and it tends to be knit together and stay on the ground and not blow away in the wind as much. Wood chips are a great material. If you're going to use wood chips, get an arborist mulch, just stripped up trees that have a lot of fines in them and big pieces together. And so those fines and leaves and little branches, everything kind of again knits together and holds together. Plus those fines sift down to the bottom and feed the soil as well. Wool, of course, either in whole fleeces or in pellets. The whole fleeces make a good mulch. They don't reduce weeds as well as something like a thick hay or straw or wood chip mulch, but they will slow down weeds a little bit, but they do great at holding moisture and providing a long-term slow release nutrient source. A great tool to use in the fall is a leaf vacuum because it will pick up those leaves and chop them, and then they're easier to distribute around your landscape as opposed to using just once the whole leaves, the leaves in their entirety, once they fall and they sometimes have a wax coating or they're hard to handle, they blow away in the wind. They don't make a great mulch always. They're harder to manage as a mulch, I should say. When you put them through something like a lawnmower or a leaf vacuum, it makes them into a much more effective, user-friendly, and more rapidly decomposing mulch. And especially if you mix them with grass clippings, they're a great combination. So if you were going to use a lot of leaves in your landscape, I would encourage you to do something like pick them up with a lawnmower or a leaf vacuum to really get them to decompose more quickly. This is a series of pictures here that I want to show you about the effect of mulch on the soil over the winter. This is in the Worland Community Garden, and we've used alfalfa and straw out there pretty effectively over the years. And this is a little bit of an edge of a kind of raised garden bed, not a raised bed, but a raised section of the garden, a row, I guess would be. And you can see on the top where the mulch has kind of blown off or slipped off the soil there. And then this is where there's still mulch, and you can see where this soil's been exposed all winter. It's starting to crust a little bit. It doesn't look particularly active. Then if we pull back this little bit of mulch here, you can see this amount of activity and the structure there underneath that mulch compared to the edge here. Just a lot more activity, a lot more porosity and structure and decomposition happening there. And this is a close-up. This is worm castings. This is what it looks like underneath there. That soil is so soft and so healthy, you could just plant right into it. There's really not much more work needs to be done. So that's a good example of the difference where it's mulched and where it's not over the winter. Here's another example. On the left here, you can see where there was some straw and probably some corn stalks and straw and various things on the mulch, and as a mulch. And if we pull that back, look at those worms coming right up underneath that and working. They will not be working up if there's bare soil there, especially when they're exposed to extreme temperatures. And so you'll see the same thing even if you have plastic or fabric on your landscape too, but where they'll come right up underneath here and start to decompose and work all this organic matter back into the soil, but they won't be working here if it's bare and exposed. This is an example of a garlic bed. You can see on the left, we ran out of mulch on this section. We didn't mulch it well enough, and these are all the weeds coming up in the spring. That's more work for you, and those are going to grow and make your gardening work harder, where this is right next door to that bed and we had enough mulch and there's very few weeds coming up. So again, heavy mulch is going to make a big difference in our harsh climate here by feeding the soil and protecting the soil, keeping what moisture we do have in the soil, and greatly reducing your work in terms of weeds the next spring. Probably the single most important thing we can do here is keep the soil covered. If you do want to work in some amendments this fall, I encourage you to use something like a broad fork. This could be done on a small scale in raised beds or on a larger scale. Use something like this to work in your amendments a little bit and then cover and mulch really well. This just helps break through any hard pan you may have, any compaction. That will again let that water and air move through the soil a little bit better and let those help amend those a little bit. Just an example, another visual of what we're going for here. This soil on the left is what came out of a conventional farm field here in the Bighorn Basin. Heavy disturbance, heavy tillage, and high use of synthetic amendments. And this on the right is something that came out of a garden with heavy organic amendments and low disturbance, the Worland Community Garden. Same soil type, just different management. And so what we're going for is a lot of organic amendments, a lot of food into that soil, low disturbance, and a lot of protection by not leaving it bare. So just to give you an idea of what our goals are here, especially in our tough soils and tough climate. This is what I was working on just yesterday. I was cleaning out. We're getting a new roof, so I'm trying to clean out a bunch of stuff along the edge of the house a little earlier than I might otherwise to get it out of the way. So this is a raised bed here in a watering trough. This is actually 3 layers. It's a little bit hard to see, but this is on the bottom here is the green layer of just some leaves and some pepper plants and some spinach, whatever was left in that bed, kind of left over, put down, and then some wool. And then on top of that, this on the left, this old straw and hay is the top layer. So there's 3 layers going on here. And so this is what I'm doing in this particular bed to just cover it up. This is straw that came out of a little straw bale where I was growing some potatoes. And I'm going to cover the whole thing with that, and I'm just going to leave it. And I'll water it and just leave it for the fall and for the winter. And there was not much room. This bed is already pretty full, and the soil in here is pretty decent. I didn't feel like there's a lot I needed to do here, but I just wanted to cover it. And there's no reason to pull all this stuff out, all this green matter here. Just let it work. Just leave it there, and the wool's going to just add a little extra. This is the one right in front of it. I still have beets in there. I'm not going to harvest that one yet. And it's struggling a little bit. I didn't really love the soil mix I had in there. It was a little heavier than I wanted. It didn't perform the way I wanted. I wasn't real happy with it. It needs a little bit of help, and it has a little bit of space yet I can add to it. So when these beets come out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a broad fork, a shovel, and I'm going to incorporate into this particular smaller raised bed some biochar and some wool, both to get that soil lightened up, and probably some crab and a few other things like that to get that mixed in and get that hopefully functioning better for next year. And then I'll cover that again with whatever I have, some more of that hay and straw and some other grass clippings and leaves, whatever I have at the end of the season. But because this one is struggling a little bit, I'm going to invest a little bit more resources into getting it boosted back up again. And I'm going to use and I'll talk more about these here shortly, but I'm going to use biochar and wool, especially in this one, to get it functioning a little bit better. And a lot of organic mulch. So the fall is also the time to start or expand a garden. And sheet mulching or lasagna gardening or lasagna composting is a great method for us. It's a way of composting in place. And to me, it's a lot easier than making the compost and putting it in your garden, right? And so it can be built directly on top of existing grass or weeds or especially tough soil. And it can also be used to fill raised beds. It needs a lot of water and a lot of time. So this is an example of what I did this spring with the little corner of our yard. And I put down wool right on top of the grass and cardboard and wood chips. This was not ready to plant right into as a garden. And I knew that, and I wasn't sure what we were going to do here. I didn't really know. So I just put this down, and then I grew on top of this in containers and grow bags and a variety of things. Well, over the summer with water and traffic and just biology and decomposition, this has gotten really decomposed quite a bit. And as I'm emptying out some of the grow bags and different things, we're getting soil on top of it, and it's decomposed considerably. I'm going to add some more mulch to this and maybe some more compost and a layer of mulch on top. And then by next spring, I should be able to plant directly into this, in through the mulch and into the soil, and have an in-ground garden. But it takes time, right? And so starting in the fall makes a big difference. So if you start now with a system like this, come spring, and you add, make sure there's plenty of compost and some and organic material and manure and other layers in there, which we can talk more about. Then come spring, you may be able to grow directly into that. I just started it this spring and I grew in containers and let that process happen under my feet as I was out there all summer. So that's just that's one method there, that you can use to take out some of your lawn and expand your garden. It's another way that we did this, again, starting in the fall. This was the community garden, just right on top of some existing weeds and plants, residue, whatever we had there, cardboard, grass clippings, and straw, a few layers of that, and then went right into the fall. And then come spring, we had a nice bed to plant into. Now you could do more layers, you can do certainly deeper layers, but that's a pretty simple system. And again, because those worms are working, they're going to be starting to decompose that and lighten up your soil also as they're working underneath that mulch. Here we are, there was garlic in part of it, so that didn't get covered in cardboard, but the rest of it's just ready to go in the spring. This is a schematic, I guess, a way that I find it more helpful to think about. There's two methods you can do here, and the number of layers are going to change based on what you have access to and how deep you want to make it. But if you look at my little clip art here of plants, one option is you put your cardboard down and you put all your compost and soil and everything on top of the cardboard, and then the mulch, and you grow in this layer of compost and soil right here that you've made thick enough for the plant roots, maybe a foot deep or so, 6 inches to a foot deep. The other option is you put on top of the existing soil and maybe some grass clippings, weeds, whatever organic, then you put your compost and soil and your amendments, and then you put your cardboard and you punch through the cardboard, you punch holes through the cardboard with your, and then transplant right into underneath here. And on top of the cardboard, you put maybe more mulch and compost. And then it acts as a biodegradable weed barrier, is basically what the cardboard does to kill what's underneath that first year. So you can play with this if you understand these basic principles of using cardboard as a weed barrier, and layering your organic amendments in the fall with a lot of water. You can play with, there's a few different ways you can do this, and there's a lot of resources that you can look up under lasagna gardening and sheet mulching. This is a way to use it to fill raised beds that works really well. It takes a lot of product, a lot of material, but it can be very, very low cost or even free. And again, water and time are the two big factors, right? So you, instead of buying raised bed mix or purchasing a lot of compost or soil, you can use layers. Again, back to the idea of composting where you have greens and browns. You can add layers of wood chips, alfalfa, hay bales is a great resource, straw, coffee grounds. You can get coffee grounds in large quantities from the gas stations and your espresso stand. Compost, manure. We finish the top off with a finished leaf compost. And again, time help. It's best to do it in the fall if you can. It takes a lot of time and water, but this is a great way. And then this is a great way to fill your raised beds for very, very low cost. Now, because there's no mineral soil in here, there's no structure, there's no sand, clay, silt, soil, anything that's going to maintain its volume. So every year, a raised bed like this will sink by several inches or more because it's decomposing slowly and getting better and better. So every year you'll need to add onto it, and the fall is a great time to do that. So empty out all empty out your lawnmower when you pick up leaves and grass clippings, put more manure and compost in the fall, and top it off every fall. But just know that it will settle in a way that a raised bed filled with more mineral soil will not. You can put logs, chunks of old rotting, decomposing wood in the bottom. That will hold a lot of water and slowly break down over time. So there's a lot of different things you can use here to fill these raised beds at low cost. And then whatever you put on the surface, you make the most mature and highest quality compost goes on the surface so that it's ready to plant into in the spring. So building soil takes time, really. Nature plays the long game. So start with a lot of organic matter and then add water and plenty just have some patience. while if you're using this lasagna gardening method, while the soil is shallow, choose your shallow rooted plants and then water more frequently and just trust the process and know that the first year you may be more challenging and every year it's going to get better and better as that soil gets deeper. But if you're using this lasagna gardening method, it will just take time and just plant shallow rooted plants the first year and water a lot. So this is the other pile of stuff I pulled out of the garden the other day, and I was looking at it and thinking, well, this is great. What do I do with all of this? How do I use it as a resource? It's hard to compost something like this in a small lot in town unless you have a compost yard or unless you have some space behind you can pile things up for a few years and let them break down. So I was looking at this and thinking, what can a person do with these big piles of garden clean out, right? So we can use it in layers of sheet mulching. If you're going to fill some raised beds, you can put that in as some of your layers. You can chop it with a lawnmower or a wood chipper and pick it up. So then when it's in your lawnmower bag, then you can transport it around your landscape or put it in a compost pile or in a bin or use it as mulch. Feed it to animals, of course, compost it. If there's anybody else has other ideas of how they deal with this, I would love to hear that. It's a little challenging because if you think about this, this is going to break down much more quickly in when it's chopped up and in small pieces, right? Because the decomposition will happen faster for smaller pieces. Plus, you have things like corn stalks, and I like to grow sunflowers, so these sunflower stems are very, very woody, very hard to break down. You've seen a pepper plant, those stems, eggplant stems, like they're just very big and thick. And so again, if you can get it chopped up and broken down or chopped up so that it will break down more quickly, that can make a big difference. This is a good system, again, if you can get it chopped into smaller pieces or for your leaves and grass clippings. I really like this wire system because it's very low cost and very simple, but it needs water. So don't pile leaves in there and then walk away and forget about it. Water it throughout the summer, throughout the fall. Just get a lot of water in there. And you'll notice in these bins full of leaves, they're kind of matted in there. They weren't chopped up first. They're really matted and they shed water and they don't decompose quickly. So if you can get them chopped up through your lawnmower or a leaf vacuum before you do this, they will break down much more quickly and make a beautiful leaf mold compost type of product. And then of course grass clippings do well in something like this too if they're mixed with something else a little bit and other organic materials. It's just a good low cost, simple system, easy to move around, it's not heavy. On the left is a good example of what does not work well. All these just large pieces just kind of thrown on top, dried out. They're not going to decompose quickly and they're very unsightly. On the right, you can see where these went through a wood chipper or shredder and then got piled up. There's still some big stems in here, and this is definitely going to be a higher carbon, lower nutrient compost, more like a mulch type material, but still useful, still going to feed the soil, still going to support soil life. It'll just be less nutrient dense. So that's certainly one option. This is what it looked like in October, and this is what it looked like when we dug into that pile in March. So it really did start to decompose. This will be great stuff to incorporate into your landscape as a higher carbon compost. But again, it needs to be chopped up in order to work well. So the question is, as we're going into fall and you're thinking about amending your soil, which nutrients do you need, or which amendments do you need rather, and how does one decide? You can just use all of them or use some of them. If you want to add nutrients and support plant vigor going into for your garden next year, those nutrients are going to come from things like compost, manure, wool, crab, kelp, feather, and bone meal, those kinds of products. Green sand, um, rock phosphate, those are the kinds of things that are going to support feeding the plants nutrients, mineral nutrients, and support plant vigor. If you want to improve your soil structure and function, water holding capacity, nutrient holding capacity, structure, workability, just is it soil tilth, then you're going to want to add things like compost and biochar and wool. Those are things that are going to make a big difference on your soil structure and function. And as you notice, some things like compost and wool are going to do both. That's how you might think about making choices about what to add to your soil in the fall. So we have some of these products, and they're available on our website and for local pickup if you're in the Worland area. You can also get them on the Eat Wyoming through Eat Wyoming. And so biochar is a similar to a charcoal type product or an activated carbon that you may be familiar with. It's made made from wood in a wood that's burned in a low oxygen environment so that the carbon mostly stays there. It's a long-term investment in soil health and function. You add it once, it stays there not quite forever, but practically forever, much longer than we'll be here. It's a passive soil organic matter form. It is not feeding the microbes, but it's providing habitat for them. It's holding nutrients, has a lot of binding sites. If you have problem with salts in your soils and contaminants, and we can talk, if you have questions after this, we can talk more about that. But biochar is the best tool for that. So it will provide binding sites to pull salts out of your soil and residual herbicide contamination. It has a very rapid impact on nutrient and water holding capacity and soil porosity, which is why I want to use it in one of my raised beds that is too compacted and dense. This is the wrong soil blend. I'm going to add biochar to help lighten that up a little bit and increase the porosity and structure. It's really good for poultry feed and for poultry coops. And on our blog, there's a blog post about using it as an additive to poultry feed and as an additive as a bedding in very small quantities in chicken coops to reduce ammonia. And then that ammonia, which is nitrogen, binds to the binding sites on biochar. Then when you clean your coops, all that nutrient stays in the biochar, hopefully ends up in your compost and in your garden, as opposed to volatilizing into the air and irritating you and the birds. So these are some of the ways that you might use biochar. Ours is, we have straight biochar, and we also have biochar that's mixed with vermicast as a nutrient source, so it's kind of both. And you can read more about both of those on our website as well. And I'm certainly happy to answer more questions about biochar and would love to hear if anybody attending the webinar today has experience with biochar. We do carry wool. Wool can be used in a whole fleece form. We have the pellets. They're a little easier to mix into the soil and distribute. Very high in carbon and nitrogen. Interestingly enough, pound for pound, wool has twice as much carbon as our manure-based compost that we make and sell. And it's got more nitrogen, almost twice the nitrogen of chicken manure, but in a very different form. It's in the form of keratin in the wool itself. So it's very, very slow to release and break down and won't burn anything. And it holds about 4 times its weight in water, which is what makes it particularly interesting in our arid climate and in containers. So smaller flower pots and containers that dry out quickly in the summer, wool can make a big difference in reducing watering frequency. And if you use it on the surface of the soil, the whole fleeces or the pellets, it does deter slugs and a few other pests. It can be added to your compost, but again, it's very slow to break down. And you can use the pellets or the whole fleece. So a great source of nitrogen, potassium, sulfur, iron, a tremendous source of carbon in the soil, which is the driver of the soil system, and holds a lot of water in the soil. Crab and kelp is another one that's great to add in the fall. Kelp has a lot of really well-researched benefits around that stimulates plant growth. And it's a source of phosphorus and calcium that really are complementary to the nutrients in the wool. So these two together are a really nice combination. The chitin in the crab shell is really interesting. There's a lot of research showing that chitin leads to something in plants and people, interestingly enough, called induced systemic resistance, which means when plant roots come in contact with the chitin in the soil, it actually stimulates their immune system. And there's a lot of interesting research around that. So again, just a good boost to the soil and provides a lot of that bioavailable phosphorus and calcium. And then of course the kelp is full of micronutrients if you think about what's in seawater, right? So a lot of micronutrients there as well. So these are some of the different products that are good for adding in the fall, really any time of year, but certainly can add them in the fall. And we do have 30% off our compost. So September and October, we have compost at $50 a yard instead of 70. So give us a call if you're in the Worland area. If you're not in the Worland area, please still check our website because we have some distributors around the state. And if you know of somebody we can work with in your area, we'd love to work with folks and get the compost out further. So that's what we have available right now. And I would also like to remind you that it's time to plant garlic and flower bulbs. And if you have not already ordered your garlic or your flower bulbs and you would like to support the Worland Community Garden, you can do so by ordering through generousroots.com. And we all 100% of the funds raised through the sale of bulbs and garlic goes to support the work of the community garden and feeding folks in the community. If you've already purchased your garlic and bulbs, it's just about time to get them in the ground here pretty quick, which is exciting. Let's see, questions. Do microbes go dormant over winter, and if so, at what point? They slow down, so maybe you could call that dormant. That's a really good question. It's going to depend somewhat on the microbes. There's a whole range of microbes that are active at different temperatures, and there's a lot of diversity in there, but they certainly will slow down. And also being dry in the winter is what causes them to slow down as well. If you think about, we stop watering our garden and we don't sometimes have some pretty dry open winters. There's not much moisture in the soil. And so keeping things wet is really important. And that's why watering your landscape throughout the winter, if you can, is also really important, because if you think about um, water, moisture in the soil helps regulate temperature better than air as well. So if you have some moisture in your soil around your tree roots and we get a real cold snap, that will regulate the temperature a little bit better than dry soil. Special considerations for a closed system such as a greenhouse. Yes, one of the high risks we have in our arid conditions here is high salt. And a greenhouse, because you're not getting the rain and snow that we do get, you have even higher risk of a salt accumulation in a greenhouse. So there will be a need. I would encourage you to manage that a little bit more carefully, and that can be done through a soil test, or if you have some more specific questions, we could dig into that a little bit more. A quick reminder on salts. Salts are positive and negative ions that dissociate in water, and they're also plant nutrients. Nearly all of them, with the exception of sodium, are plant nutrients. What happens is when you have too much salt in the soil solution, so it's the water part of the soil, water in the soil, it's too high of salts, it's hard on the plants. It's like you trying to drink some salt water, right? They can't get, almost like it's not really drought because the water's there, but the plants can't get the water out of the soil. So what happens is when we have that accumulation of salts, it's hard on the plants. Biochar basically can pull some of those salts out of the soil solution, out of the water, and hold them on the binding sites, so the plants can get to them when they want them, but that doesn't make the soil water salty, if that makes any sense. So your salts are things like potassium nitrate. Potassium and nitrate are both mineral nutrients the plants need, but when they're excess in the soil, that can be hard on the soil. Phosphate, sulfate, nitrate, all of these things, again, if they're in excess, they can be hard on the plants, but the plants do need them as well. So that in a greenhouse type system, salts can be a bigger challenge to manage for sure. And so we could look at using sources of nutrients that are very low in salts. Wool would be one of those, a very low salt compost, a few other things like that, and biochar can help. Let's see. Flail mowers are great for reducing material into a very small size. Thank you. That's from Pete there. So that's another good reminder. Yeah, thank you. If you think about decomposition happens from the outside in, and it's directly related to the particle size. The rate of decomposition is related to the particle size. So the smaller it is, the faster it will decompose. BJ put the free shipping code in here. Thank you. Everyone, you should be able to unmute and start your video if you would prefer to ask questions instead of in the chat. Does wool attract mice? I have never had wool attract mice. I suspect if you had, if it was, you had a habitat where they were getting in under some of your mulch and in your garden and maybe in your compost pile, they would probably really like the wool. I don't think the wool in and of itself attracts the mice. I'm sure that if you had habitat where their wool liked for other reasons, where the mice were there, or there was some food there and habitat for them, they would probably be very happy to use that wool in their nest. The pellets also, once those pellets get wet and puff up, the pelleting process shreds the wool or shortens those wool fibers so much it's almost becomes it's no longer those long fibers that you might think of in a fleece. Do we have any other questions? Anybody want to just unmute and ask or raise their hand?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
So I want to mulch around my shrubs for the winter. So should I put some compost or these other organic materials down first, then lay my wood chips over the top of it? Is that a good strategy?
I would if you want to add nutrients, depending on where are you?
Cody.
Okay, yeah, I mean, you have the whole state, really, we have pretty tough soils. So I would, if you were gonna mulch, I would put your compost, or any other nutrient source that you wanted underneath. If you could, if there's a way to work it in a little bit, you could. But even if you just put it on top of the soil and then mulch on top of that, let this, whatever snow you do get, push that down, and then as you water your landscape, those nutrients will work their way down in. And then hopefully the worms and microbes will work there as well. So I would put the compost underneath your high carbon mulch.
Okay. And when you talk about mulch, there's different kinds. You can buy like cedar chips in bags. The city of Cody has a big pile of shredded up, I guess, trees and shrubs that's there down by the river for free. But does it matter? And then there's the bark. I don't really like bark. What's the pro and con of different kinds of mulch to put around shrubs and flower beds?
Yeah, your arborist mulch, which is probably what the city of Cody has there for free, and we have some of that here for folks that are in the Worland area, is probably one of your best products you can get. It's not as uniform. If people, certain people like a dyed mulch or like you said, the bark or something that looks a little more uniform across their landscape. But in terms of soil quality and function and plant health, that arborist mulch is probably the best because it has a lot of the fines in it. It has some shredded leaves and bark and various other things. It's not only big chunks of wood. And then if it's been sitting in that big pile for some time, it's already been decomposing. So it's going to have a lot of fungal activity probably and bacterial activity already on it, a lot of really good biology already active there, which will feed your soil. And then it will decompose over time, so you'll need to continue adding it. But as it decomposes, it's just feeding the soil. So that's a benefit. So if you're looking at it purely as in terms of soil function, that's probably your best product. Of course, we talked about something like, straw or hay. Even a really high carbon compost can make a nice mulch, but it doesn't look as nice maybe on the landscape for around perennial landscaping as a wood chips might, and be good for walking on or driving across or something. Um,
Good. Another question about compost. So I reseeded my lawn this year. My new seed has been down for about 6 weeks. And so would spreading a thin layer of compost be a good idea as
Oh
I
yeah, thanks. I didn't even talk about lawn care. If you look at our blog, please, there is a post about using compost on the lawns, and it does great. Our compost does really well, and most compost would. And fall is a great time to add it. So we recommend using something like like a roller that spreads it uniformly across the lawn. And this is a great time to put it down, especially if you can do it right before you're going to get some good moisture. And that will really feed the compost going, or feed the soil and the lawn going into the fall. You can do it in the spring as well. Um, there's different kinds of compost. Our manure-based compost is quite high in nitrogen. Sometimes the municipalities around the state make like a yard waste based compost that's very, very high in carbon and very low in nitrogen. That's not going to feed your lawn quite as much. It's not going to make your lawn green up quite as well, but it will still provide, some carbon for the soil. So there's a difference in the type of compost you might put on your lawn. Um, your grass growing yet?
yeah, it's growing. I've mowed it twice. So it's pretty well established.
Yeah, so it'd be a great time to put on some compost, and you can look at our blog post there about it.
Mhm.
Closer to you, there's some we took some compost up to the Meeteetse Conservation District, and they have it available for sale too. If you want to get some of the manure-based compost that we have that does well on lawns, you can pick it up there. It's a little closer than Moreland for you.
Right. So thinking about my lawn with a compost spreader, uh, do I want a quarter inch, a half inch? What should I target for how much
Yeah,
compost
quarter
should I get?
inch-ish, probably
Okay.
eighth to a quarter inch. It's
Okay.
obviously a pretty rough estimate, but you can
Yeah,
see
sure.
pictures on of what we've done. That works
Okay.
pretty well. But that's what I would suggest.
And how do I calculate how many yards per 1,000 square feet of lawn, or how do I make that calculation?
I think it's in there. We have a compost calculator on the website,
Okay.
and I think it's in that blog post with the lawn stuff that has some rough estimates of what we've noticed as we've spread out on other lawns.
Okay. Great.
And
Thank you.
if not, you can just give us a call and we can walk you through it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Any other questions we can answer?
I have one, Caitlin.
Go ahead.
When people rip out their tomato plants with the green tomatoes still on and hang them in their garage to ripen, would it be better to like cut them off so that you keep the roots in the soil instead?
You certainly could. That's a great idea. Yeah, I've never done that. I've never pulled out the plant. I know that you can do that. It's a good system. I've never done it. But yeah, cut them off at the base. Same with your peppers or eggplants or anything like that, and just let those roots decompose over time. And you'll notice too that as your soil gets healthier and more biologically active, the rate of decomposition will significantly increase. So over time, you'll notice that those roots start to break down faster and faster in the soil as you just get basically more hungry microbes there. Yeah, good idea. Anyone else have any or anything they'd like to share that they've done or that's worked well for them or not worked well or anything else to share?
I'm curious what your experience is with biochar from different sources. I've heard of people making it out of bones instead, so like a bone char out
Yeah,
of
bone
the.
char is cool. I don't have any direct experience with it from different sources. We get ours from a place up in Montana. You can certainly make your own. I do know folks here who make their own and just in a 55-gallon drum, metal 55-gallon drum. It's on a small scale. The bone char is intriguing because it would be higher in phosphorus than your potentially than your wood-based biochar. And I know that that biochar varies quite a bit based on what it's made out of. So if anybody is looking for more details on that, we can share the lab results from the biochar we carry and some additional resources as well. So thank you all. Would love it if you would please check out our website and follow us on social media and our newsletter if that's something that you would like to keep up to date as we do more webinars and share more videos. I try and share quite a bit on our social media channels, various things we're working on and different soil lessons. So thank you all for joining us and have a lovely evening.